Hello, everyone. This is the mind of Lilith, and thank you for joining me for part one of my astrological overview of Rich Homie Quan's natal chart. Rich Homie Quan's real name is Dequantes Devontay Lamar, and he was born on October 4th, 1989 in Atlanta, Georgia. He had a pretty successful career as a rapper, reaching some modicum of success and fame and popularity over a decade ago. And he wasn't really active in the music industry as of late, but unfortunately, he died a few weeks ago of a drug overdose at the young age of 34. The toxicology report that was just released stated that he had a cocktail of intoxicants in his system, which ultimately led to his death. So, of course, I'm going to discuss this big old T-square that includes Neptune, the planet of suicide, intoxicants, and escapism. Now, Neptune is not the only planet responsible for addiction. Addictive qualities can also be attributed to Venus and Jupiter. But in Devontay's case, Neptune has a lot of power. Neptune is part of a very tight T-square that consists of Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune in Capricorn, the Sun and Mars in Libra, and Jupiter and Chiron in the sign of Cancer. This T-square is incredibly significant and dense because it consists of 6 out of 9 planets, as well as Chiron, and the aspects are nearly exact. I mean, you guys can see that we have Mars in Libra, Neptune in Capricorn, and Jupiter in Cancer, all at 9 degrees each. So these aspects are exact, which amplifies their power, right, or their energy. So this T-square consisting of Neptune, Mars, and Jupiter is being juiced up by Uranus at 1 degree of Capricorn, conjunct Saturn at 7 degrees of Capricorn, square the Sun in Libra at 11 degrees. These orbs are incredibly tight, which to me indicates a very karmic quality to Devontay's life, i.e. Devontay may not have been able to see his situation or his experiences from an elevated perspective, which would have allowed him to make different choices by not engaging in self-destructive behavior out of self-pity or repressed anger. So T-squares can cause incredible psychological and emotional tension that can manifest as extreme behavior or dissociative fractured consciousness. If you hold 2 stones together in your hand and you jostle them around, right? The stones will clash, but they won't break necessarily. And the clashing sound represents the dissonance, the chaos, and the confusion created when a person cannot reconcile the extreme contradictions in their personality. And considering the planets involved in a T-square, Devontay's attempts to merge or integrate these contradictions may have involved sex, drugs, music, and or violence. So Devontay suffered from energetic paralysis caused by the Sun, Saturn, and Mars Neptune square, which made him unsure of himself. He had low self-esteem or poor self-image. And then, he may have used drugs and engaged in reckless or dangerous behaviors to manage his inability to manage his affairs or go after his life with confidence. On a side note, Mars square Uranus, which Devontay has, can sometimes indicate a death that happens quickly and unexpectedly, sometimes through violence. Mars square Neptune can portend death by lethal injection, and Saturn square Mars can presage death by bludgeoning or suffocation, depending on the house placements and other aspects. So based on Devontay's chart configuration with this big old T-square, I can see that there's a direct correlation between his self-destructive behavior and his relationship with his father. So both Devontay's Saturn and Sun are afflicted by malefics on both sides. And what's interesting is that Saturn is in domicile. It's very strong in the sign of Capricorn. This placement sometimes indicates that the father has the capacity to fulfill his role as the patriarch, and he was prepared to take on the responsibility of being a productive citizen and not a derelict, a criminal, or pariah. However, Saturn is besieged by Uranus and Neptune in Capricorn on both sides, and they're both attacking the Sun and Mars in Libra. Saturn and Mars are planets of masculinity, self-confidence, and personal power. So any afflictions to these planets by sign, aspect, or house placement could inflict the individual with feelings of helplessness or powerlessness, which can trigger anger and even bullying, right? So this is like somebody who tries to make you feel helpless and powerless to offset those feelings that they have within themselves. It's like a form of energy transference. So Uranus and Saturn are enemies. In fact, in the astrological mythos, Saturn castrated Uranus, who is his father, and he took over his kingdom, aka the solar system. So both Uranus and Neptune can weaken the ties that bind us to the responsibility or the obligations or duties that Saturn has created for us, right? Whether it's a responsibility to our children, our relationships, our careers. Uranus wants freedom and independence, and Neptune wants the soft life with no rules, no schedules, and no structure. This is the I want to be whatever the hell I want to be and do whatever the hell I want to do aspect. Now, because Capricorn is involved, I'm going to speculate that Devantay's father may have wanted financial freedom and or he wanted the freedom to cultivate his own financial security or prosperity, and taking care of a child as a father may have gotten in the way of those plans, right? So there may also have been shame about having a child out of wedlock. Devantay has the moon in Sagittarius, which is in the 12th house behind Saturn. So there may have been something hidden about this pregnancy, or Devantay's father may have felt like his mother did something without his knowledge or behind his back, which made him angry and triggered this Saturn-Mars square. So while I do see that Devantay's father was capable of providing for his son, his own trauma may have prevented him from doing so during Devantay's formative years. It appears that his father had a lot of anger towards his own mother, which he projected onto the mother of his child. So when I see Saturn-Sun squares or oppositions, or sometimes even the conjunction, it can indicate that the child's conception and or birth may have been inconvenient, stressful, or undesirable for the father in some way. And so there could have been some shunning, abandonment, abuse, or excessive criticism that negatively impacts the child's self-esteem. You find this aspect in charts where people have an inability to form intimate bonds because their father treated them like they were a burden, or there was something wrong with them, which now affects that person's ability to connect with others because they don't know how to connect with themselves. So some natives with Saturn conjunct square or opposite to their sun, they have internalized their father's overt or covert rejection by way of absence or rejection or abdication of responsibilities and duties as a father, right? And so the Uranus-Saturn-Neptune conjunction square opposition can indicate a father who will reject their responsibilities because they want the freedom to enjoy their life on their terms. So Devantay's father himself may have been traumatized by extreme poverty, social shame, or parental neglect or lack of nurturing from his own mother. And essentially, he could not give Devantay's mother what he did not have for himself, which was love, compassion, patience, or empathy. So when I first looked at Devantay's chart, I immediately saw that there were daddy issues. But Devantay and his father were relatively close around the time of his death. So I was low-key confused because I didn't know much about his story. Then I read that while he was a child, Devantay's father intentionally withheld financial support from his mother, even though he had the means to help, and this was an example of an afflicted Saturn, using deprivation or poverty as a means of control and punishment. And then when you add the Mars square aspect, this was done out of anger or retribution. And Devantay internalized these emotions, and thus the T-square in his chart was crystallized and needed to be played out for Devantay to reconcile extreme feelings of love and anger or pride and shame or confidence and insecurity, which was wreaking havoc on his mental and emotional health and even his nervous system. Now, Uranus square the sun and even Uranus square Saturn can create a restless energy that is easily bored or agitated. So with Saturn square opposite or conjunct the sun and sometimes the moon, the father's presence or lack thereof can be emotionally, physically, or psychologically crippling to the child. And, these circumstances have a disastrous impact on the child's self-esteem and thus their relationships with friends, loved ones, and their children. So Devantay also has Saturn square Mars, and this is a nasty aspect that can make the person cruel, impatient, demanding, uncompromising, and sometimes violence is used to overcompensate for a weak sense of masculinity. Children who don't have safe, healthy, nurturing relationships with men tend to overcompensate by being ultra macho or ultra submissive in their relationships. And this goes for both men and women. And yes, there is definitely a direct correlation between the absence of fathers in the home, the lack of healthy role models, male role models in the community, and self-destructive and excessive sexual activity in the Black community. So with the Saturn, Mars, and Saturn Sun square, we see that not only was Devantay's father abusive in some way, but this abuse was inflicted out of anger, a desire to control, or exact punishment because his rules were not being followed. So studies have shown that the presence of a strong, competent, intelligent, and responsible man in the home on a consistent basis can delay puberty in children. A lot of neglected teenagers and young adults use sex as a subconscious way to connect with their masculinity in ways their father did not demonstrate to them. So now we have a community of confused adults engaging in these blurred line situationships with 50 genders, drug abuse, no discipline, resentment, extreme violence, separation anxiety, projections, codependency, and mommy and daddy issues. There's a reason that young people conflate having sex with being grown because they're using sex to fill in the void of parental neglect. So subconsciously, they're trying to parentify themselves through the act of sex, which usually leads to having children, which in a way is completing the cipher, right? Now my life is complete because I have the opportunity to experience what it's like to be a parent so I can be a better mother or father to my child than they were to me, okay? Now, in homosexual relationships, this can manifest as like May-December partnerships, much older men with much younger men. So although Devantay and his father had a better relationship as he got older, he never had the opportunity to repair the damage that was done to his psyche and his self-esteem as a child, especially since those wounds fueled anger and aggression that more than likely expressed itself in violent or self-destructive activity. In other words, I think that Devantay became addicted to the coping mechanisms that he used to manage his anger, depression, and insecurity. Now, on a positive note, the T-square provides a lot of energy for success. The tension and extremes build character, courage, conviction, and competence because nothing comes easily for these people. There's always some internal or external conflict that requires sacrifice or compromise. Now, I believe that Devantay's ambitions to be a famous or successful person was driven by a deep desire to receive copious amounts of attention, love, and adoration from fans to fill the void of his father's absence when he was a child, and maybe even gain his father's acceptance, approval, and respect, as we can see with Jupiter in the 10th house from his son. I think that Devantay's father was managing him when he died. I'm not sure, but yeah, I've read that somewhere. So with Jupiter in Cancer square Mars in Libra, Devantay may have lacked the courage or confidence to stand on his own as an individual. And he may have needed a clique or crew for moral and emotional support, which is not a bad thing, but Libras are very sensitive to peer pressure. Their scales are very delicate and they can tip to extremes very easily. So Librans, more than most other signs, need to have positive role models because it is very easy for them to lose their identity trying to fit in with the crowd or within their environment, especially when Neptune is making a significant aspect to their personal planets, their chart ruler, and or Venus. So Devantay's desire for close masculine relationships may have facilitated associations with dangerous, hypermasculine, or criminal type men, right? So as I discussed in my PBN Rock commentary a couple years ago, last year, I forget, people with Mars square Jupiter enjoy fighting. They enjoy having opportunities to express their masculinity through war, fighting, or competition. And with Mars in Libra and Jupiter in Cancer, I would not be surprised if Devantay was part of a violent gang, crew, or an organization that felt like a brotherhood or an extended family for him. So let's talk about Neptune real quick. Neptune is a very challenging planet to deal with, and I consider it one of the malefics because Neptune's energy is sort of inimical to Saturn's domain, which is Earth itself. Yes, Neptune is wonderful for creative types, actors, performers, writers, artists, etc. But Saturn gives us the discipline to not only develop these talents to a high level of mastery, because Saturn is exalted in Libra, which is ruled by Venus, but Saturn ensures that we are not ignoring our practical needs, our bodies, and the obligations that provide us with a system or matrix through which we can enjoy Neptune, music, movies, entertainment, etc. So the energy of Neptune is essentially useless or can be useless unless that energy can be manifested or expressed in a 3D. So this is how Saturn and Neptune work together, right? It is great to have your dreams, illusions, fantasies, imaginations, and all of your gifts, but if they're only in your head and you're not sharing them with anybody, then the collective does not benefit from your gifts. And we don't benefit from Whitney Houston's voice. We don't benefit from Freddie Mercury's voice. We don't benefit from J.K. Rowling's writing. We don't benefit from Rich Homie Quan's music. Even though I wasn't a huge fan of his music, he had artistic talent. So Neptune must respect Saturn. And if it does not, it will destroy itself in its own delusions and its own fantasies. So fortunately for Devontay, even though he had Neptune square his sun sign, which is really challenging for creative types, and it is one of the aspects for addiction, right? Saturn was also supporting. Saturn was giving Devontay the discipline that he needed to have a successful career. Devontay had the discipline to hone his craft, and that is all Saturn. So I honestly believe that Rich Homie Quan was able to have a successful career to an extent because of the influence of Saturn, for better or worse. Saturn gave him the discipline and the work ethic to develop his creative talents and to have the confidence to express them as well, because he knew he was good at what he did because he worked really hard at honing his craft. Saturn, even though Saturn's a malefic and Saturn's making a square to the sun sign, which is affecting his self-esteem to an extent, his self-image, Neptune does soften the influence of Saturn, and so does Uranus. So he was able to work with these energies to have a significant impact on the music industry when he did. So yeah, because Devontay had Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune in his sign of Capricorn, business, industry, and economy were important for him. He more than likely had a keen interest in the music business, not just as an entertainer, but as a product to be bought and sold. And he knew how to market himself to appeal to his fans. So in Devontay's case, Neptune really helped to soften Saturn's edges. Devontay was sensitive, empathetic, intuitive, perceptive, and very creative. He was also androgynous, with Mars in Libra being in mutual reception with Venus in Scorpio, as well as Neptune and Uranus square the Sun and Mars. Okay, these are gender bending aspects. I'm not saying that he was gay. I'm saying that he knew how to integrate or incorporate both his masculine and feminine energies. And that integration was facilitated by Neptune, which again weakens the boundaries and restrictions that Saturn places upon us. So gender is a boundary or restriction. And I think that Rich Homie Quan was one of the first rappers who really set off this gender bending, androgynous and feminine style. So I think Devontay's confusion about his masculinity, not his sexuality, two different things. I think that helped him creatively. And I think the drugs helped him to manage or maneuver the interplay between two different genders or two different sexes. So yeah, with Mars and Venus being in mutual reception and Neptune making a square with Mars, this can manifest as a gender bending persona, or at the very least, having a very feminine and hypnotic way of moving your body that is very alluring to both men and women. So with the Neptune square to Sun aspect, Devontay became addicted to the world that he escaped to when he was high. And the freedom he felt when he was in that space was intoxicating. He was able to create without fear of being judged or criticized. And it also helped him to soften the tensions of this intense T-square. With Neptune square Mars, though, Devontay needed a strong, disciplined, and organized person to manage his life. He may have had a poor sense of time. He may have allowed his inhibitions or insecurities to restrict or block his creative output, especially as the years went on and he, was out of the game for a little bit. But yeah, with the Neptune Mars square, this is a very self-destructive aspect. It can cause a lack of discipline, disorganization, excessive timidity, inhibition. Even though Devontay was exceptionally intelligent, because he does have an exalted Mercury in Virgo, his timing was off. He was too passive when he should have been more aggressive, or too aggressive when he should have been more calm. What is also very interesting is that there is a mutual reception between Mars in Libra and Saturn in Capricorn. Mars is exalted in Capricorn and Saturn is exalted in Libra. So in spite of his challenges, right, and the obstacles he had in his life, Devontay was almost destined for success, not just because of this Jupiter Cancer placement, but because the mutual reception between Mars and Saturn makes somebody really resilient. I would say ruthless, very determined. This is somebody who has dogged determination. Nothing's going to stop them from accomplishing their goals. And I think that once he accomplished those goals, once Devontay accomplished his goals and he was still dissatisfied or unhappy, or he still had issues, I think the drug abuse may have gotten worse because he couldn't buy his way into happiness. All the girls, all the money, all the fame, all the accolades, even his father's presence in his life could not heal that primal wound that he received as a child, because he does have Chiron in Cancer, and Chiron in Cancer is making a square to the Sun in Libra and in opposition to Saturn in Capricorn. So, even though his father and him patched things up later on, they got pretty close, that initial wounding was never resolved, and it triggered the addiction problems, or it made them worse. And so I think once Devontay became successful and he still had that hole within him, he used the substances and other self-destructive behaviors to make himself feel better. And it went to an extreme level because Neptune doesn't know when to stop, especially Neptune opposite Jupiter. There is no stopping Neptune opposite Jupiter. You don't know when to stop. I mentioned earlier that he had a whole cocktail of drugs in his system. So he may not have been trying to just get high. He wanted to get blasted in a sense. He didn't want to feel anything. He wanted to be completely removed from reality, which in a sense Neptune does do by way of suicide. That is why it's the planet that represents suicides and overdoses and intoxications. And what makes Neptune so insidious is that it removes the boundaries of distinction. So there's no difference between life or death, wrong or right, good or bad, up or down. There's no difference. So how do you know if you're alive or you're not alive, right? You're in a state of this limbo while you're high, and the high can feel so good, you don't care if it takes you out. As long as you feel good, nothing matters. So Neptune will make self-destruction feel so good. That is why it's probably one of the most powerful and dangerous malefics besides Saturn and Pluto. With Saturn, you can feel the pain, you can feel the poverty, you can feel the lack and the hunger and the stress. You can feel it. With Neptune, you can't feel anything but the pleasure that you're getting from the escapist behavior. And that escapist behavior is usually self-destructive to your career, to your relationships, to your finances, to yourself even. And so that is one of the reasons why I keep harping on Neptune, because it's such a hard planet to understand, because Neptune gives you what you want. If you want to get high all day, sure, let's get high all day. Saturn makes us feel bad. Saturn makes us feel rejected, neglected, unwanted, right? Isolated. So Neptune gets rid of those feelings. So if Neptune makes me feel good, then it must be good for me. Whatever I'm doing to escape from my pain and my trauma must be good for me. So I'm going to do more and more of it until I go over the edge. Now I have no teeth. Now I have no job. Now I have no money. Now I have no children to take care of because CPS took them because I'm on drugs all day. Now I don't have a place to stay, right? But guess what? You can't blame anybody else but yourself for that. And that's why Neptune is sometimes called the cosmic mirror, because it is mirroring back to you your own deficiencies, your own inadequacies, your own projections, your own fantasies. Speaking of which, I'm going to do a reading for Stephanie Mills. I'm going to look at her chart. I don't know if I should post it to the membership tier or to the main channel. But Stephanie Mills stated that she's never been in a relationship where a man would take care of her. She's always been taking care of her partners. And at 67 years old, the men her age want younger women who are light-skinned, who don't have her phenotype. Okay, so I looked at her chart, and that is a bunch of poppycock. And I'll discuss why, probably by tomorrow or Monday if I have the time. But yeah, I'll keep you guys posted in the community section. But yeah, back to the Neptune situation. Neptune is not all bad. It is not all bad. It is very healing. It's very soothing, especially if you had a lot of Saturn in your life, a lot of darkness, depression, feelings of isolation, a lack of self-love. Neptune connects you with God consciousness, which is kind of like the superego, not the alter ego, but the superego. And this is the abdication of like the ties that bind us to the 3D world. Our possessions, our relationships, our physical body, our social status. Neptune can help us to escape from all of those things. And it's very attractive and alluring because of that. But as we can see now, 30, 40 years into the war with drugs, which was an act of genocide by the U.S. government. I'm going to discuss that probably next week because I'm working on a whole commentary about it. I was supposed to publish it weeks ago, but I'm a very complicated thinker, and sometimes I have a hard time editing myself. Sometimes I go too deep into things, or I don't go deep enough intentionally because I don't want to scare anybody off. It's weird. But yeah, Unfortunately, with the T-square, and I think I mentioned this in Diddy's chart. Did he have a T-square? I forget. But unfortunately, the very things that bring us success can also destroy us. And that is definitely the case with Neptune, because Neptune did fuel and facilitate and support Rich Homie Quan's creativity. It did help him to get out of the self-consciousness that Saturn was creating for him, because he did have issues with his self-image and his self-esteem because of that, right? Neptune gave him the confidence to express his creativity and not be worried about other people's opinions of him. And, it helped him to escape from that hard, heavy energy of the Saturn-Mars square and Saturn-Sun square and Chiron square to Sun. He was in a lot of pain for most of his life, if not all of his life. He was in a whole lot of emotional pain. And unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, when you're dealing with T-squares, you're dealing with extreme behaviors. You're dealing with overcompensation. You're dealing with an inability to integrate the energies that are within the T-square effectively. And so now your behavior is contradictory. You're disciplined, but also irresponsible. You want to be in a relationship, but you don't want to be committed. You're a man, but you like wearing women's clothes, as we saw with Marvin Gaye's father. Marvin Gaye also had the Mars square Saturn aspect and Mars square Sun in his chart. So he had issues with his masculinity too, because of his father's issues with his masculinity or his ability to be a father figure, right? But Marvin Gaye had Saturn in debilitation or in its fall in Aries. So unlike Devontay's father, Marvin Gaye's father was very jealous of him. I don't think that Devontay's father was jealous of him at all. I think his father was proud of him, to be honest, because Saturn is in really high dignity, not just by sign, but by aspect. It is a mutual reception to Mars. So this is very productive energy. But if you're not being productive, you're being destructive. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't think Rich Homie Quan was producing any music or he was active like that in the industry, and so all of that tension became self-destructive. He started to implode, I believe. So yeah, as I'm talking, I pulled up Marvin Gaye's chart, and Marvin Gaye had Mars in Capricorn, Saturn in Aries, the Sun in Aries. So Mars and Saturn are also making a mutual reception in Marvin Gaye's chart, and his father ended up killing him. For Marvin Gaye, Saturn is in its fall conjunct the Sun in exaltation. So his father definitely had issues with his identity that caused him to bully everyone around him. As a matter of fact, I'm going to do a separate reading for Marvin Gaye and his father. But yeah. All right, guys, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for listening. If you want to order your own personal reading, the link's in the description box. I look forward to your feedback. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll speak to you soon.